You're listening to Talking Law on Radio 97 with Despina Priala, and if you have a question to do with the law, more than happy to answer that for you. Despina will, if she doesn't know the answer, she will find it. Just send it to us in an email and send it to breakfast97. Have I got that right? Let me start.
Yeah, maybe keep going.
Okay. Just send it to breakfast97 at superradionetwork.com.au. That is breakfast97 at superradionetwork.com.au.
Despina, thank you, Wayne, for that. Despina, this has got to be one of my favourite segments. Do you know why?
Why is
We're
that?
going to share some secrets
I am.
with our listeners.
Secret out of the box here.
I love secrets. Because Despina, obviously, you're a property lawyer. You've dealt with law for 20 plus years. Yes. I won't say the exact number. But this one in particular is all about stamp duty. You have a list of secrets that you want to share with our listeners because you know from experience that people go into this property settlement and stamp duty is one of the scariest aspects. So take it away.
Well, yes, I will. Thank you. So I love talking about stamp duty, and it is going to be about releasing the secrets of stamp duty because I dare say that some things I'll mention this morning that the listeners out there won't even know about. So we love stamp duty and we know about it, we understand it, and we tell clients and advise clients all the time how stamp duty works. So if we start with the basics that in Queensland and other states, stamp duty is a tax. It's just simply put a tax. It's a state tax. Now, it's payable on dutiable instruments. So in simple terms, that means basically certain documents. But a lot of things are covered. So if you're buying and selling property, right, you've got to sign documents. Those documents are going to be dutiable, so liable for stamp duty. But there are other things that people don't think about that you have to pay duty on. For example, business assets. For example, chattels. So there are lots of different heads of where duty is payable, not just about property. So it's really important for people to understand buying a house, unit or land, there's always duty, and other things such as buying a business, you've got to pay duty, and chattels as well as partnerships and trusts. So there's a whole range of other complicated areas of stamp duty law, but we're going to talk about some of the more of the mainstream areas of stamp duty for the listeners. So that's the basic introduction about stamp duty, that it exists, unfortunately, and everyone has to pay for it.
And it can be sneaky.
And it's sneaky. So one of the little things that people may not know is, of course, there's always a timing issue. When do you actually pay stamp duty? And most people think you pay for it at settlement of your transaction.
Yes.
Not necessarily.
Oh.
Okay? So first of all, the general rule is you've got to pay duty within 30 days of signing your agreement. Okay. Then we have another rule that says if your agreement is conditional, so we've talked about it before, subject to finance, subject to pest and building, subject to getting a DA, then the date to pay stamp duty is pushed out. So it's actually 30 days from when the last condition is satisfied. Great,
wow.
Makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
But there's a little trick, because if your contract has a condition and that condition relies solely on you to satisfy it, for example, due diligence. So if you have a clause, and a lot of people do it, to say this contract subject to due diligence, the buyer's got to be satisfied. So that's a condition that you alone have to satisfy. You're not waiting for a third party like counsel. You're not waiting for an inspector to come and do a report. You're not waiting for the bank. So in that case, you do not get that extension. So you will get caught out, which means stamp duty is payable after the first 30 days. So clients need to understand that, and maybe the way we sort of get around that is we perhaps will negotiate other conditions in your contract, not just have that one condition. So that's another trick about the timing. And then we move on to other interesting things like concessions and exemptions.
Oh, I love the word exemptions.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly. So a lot of people would love that. So very few exemptions exist in states and territories in Australia, but there are some exemptions, and you may or may not qualify. So before we get into those, we want to talk about the concessions. So most people are aware that when you buy a property and you use it as your principal place of residence, you get a concessional rate. Okay. And if you are a first home buyer, what you need to understand is there is a threshold of $500,000. So it used to be less than that, but now currently in Queensland it's 500,000. What that means is if you buy a property 500,000 or less and you are a first home buyer, and that's all buyers are first home buyers when you buy, so if you're buying with someone else, it's got to apply for all buyers, you pay no duty. So it's zero. Yeah. So, and then if you...
What?
So,
Really?
So once
Wow,
you...
that's good.
Yes, that's the threshold. Well, in the market now, I think maybe they should be moving that threshold
Push it up
a little bit
yeah.
higher.
9 million if you are on the tweet. No, yeah, true. 500,000. It's getting a little less.
It needs to move a little bit up.
Yeah.
So the rules with that though is that you get a concessional rate. You don't pay the top rate of duty for an investment property, an investment rate we call it. But there are some rules, and the rules are this. Okay, so you've got a whole year to move into the property and use it as your principal place of residence. Some people are relocating interstate, so they don't have to stress and go, oh, I've got to be there on the day of settlement. No, you've got a whole year to move in, so don't stress about that. However, during that time, you can't rent it, you can't collect income. It's got to be vacant, okay?
Completely vacant.
And then once you do move in, you've got to stay there for a whole year. Okay, so that is those are the rules to make sure you can claim that concession. You've got to stick with those rules. So that's really important. And you don't have to make that decision whether you're buying it for that purpose or for investment up until settlement. So if you're not sure and you might have things changing, particularly off the plan, I'm not sure what I'm going to do in 2 years, I might relocate or I might not. You don't have to make that decision until closer to settlement. Okay, so that's very important as well. Now let's go on to the exemptions.
Exemptions,
okay?
yeah.
All right. So some of the exemptions I think some people would be aware of, but it's important to mention those, of course, but mention some others that I think some people might be surprised with. Okay.
The secrets.
So let's talk about some, I call it the basic ones, perhaps some people might already know. So if you own property with someone as joint tenants, that person dies. We call it a record of death. Okay, so the survivor by law will inherit that property. So there's no duty because you do have to do a transfer. You have to transfer it into your sole name. It's a transfer, normally dutiable, but it's exempt. Okay, if you inherit a property as a beneficiary under a will, okay, when your property is transferred to you, there's no duty. Okay, so that's important. Perhaps some people would be aware already. If you're buying a manufactured home in a manufactured home park, land lease communities, it's completely exempt, always has been, and I believe the same in New South Wales. So that's very important. So you don't pay duty on those homes. One big benefit, okay, for people who are interested in those types of properties. Then if you own property now as joint tenants or tenants in common with your partner or whoever, if you want to change it, so you go, you know what, we've owned it as joint tenants, but for whatever reason, we want to change it to tenants in common now. We want to change the way that we own it. That means you have to lodge a transfer. Normally there's duty, it's exempt.
Great.
Okay, there's a couple of conditions with that, but normally it's exempt. Okay, so that's important. And the last one of the mainstream exemptions, there are some other quirky ones, too complicated I think for today, but if you want to gift, so say you're in a marriage or in a de facto or in a civil partnership and you want to gift the property that you already own to your partner, right? Your husband, wife, your de facto or your civil partner in a civil partnership, and you want to gift it. You want to go, you know what? I want you to come on too. I want you to own this with me, okay, as joint tenants or tenants in common or whatever the situation is. So that is actually exempt. But there's a couple of conditions.
What are the
Okay.
conditions?
Well, you've got to live there together as your principal place of residence. Okay.
So if you wanted to give it to your mum, you're signing up to a year with mama under one roof.
Yeah. Well, you've got to give it to. We're talking about a marriage. So
Marriage.
spouses,
Okay.
de factos, and civil partnerships.
So it's not just anyone. Yeah.
That's right. So if you own property and you're going into this relationship and you're in it for a while, you go, you know what? I'm going to get you on time. I'm going to gift it to you. You don't have to pay me anything. We're together. What are we going to do about it? Do I have to pay duty? No, provided that you both are going to live there. It's not going to be an investment property. So you're going to live there as your principal place of residence and you're actually going to own it as joint tenants or tenants in common in equal shares. So That's a little quirky one. A lot of people aren't aware of that, and there is no duty on that particular type of transfer.
So stamp duty has plenty of secrets, plenty of little hidden corners.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, if you have any more questions, you can get in touch with Despina directly. Where can they go, Des?
They can phone the office 55291 294, or they can email info@prialalegal.com.au.
Thank you so much again, Despina, and we'll catch you next week for Talking Law.
See you then.